Sometimes the greatest treasures aren't buried in the ground, they're hidden in the hearts of people who've been forgotten by time. When Jake Morrison saw the classified ad in the dusty corner of the Phoenix newspaper, he almost turned the page. Ranch for sale, $50. Serious buyers only. Cash. It seemed impossible. Land in Arizona, even the most barren desert, cost thousands per acre. But Jake had exactly $50 in his wallet, a broken-down truck, and nothing left to lose. What he didn't know was that this wasn't just any piece of land. Deep in the Sonoran Desert, where the government had tried to erase history, 3 Apache women had been waiting for 70 years. They had protected something so precious, so sacred, that they were willing to give away everything to ensure it survived. Jake thought he was buying a ranch. What he actually purchased was a destiny that would connect him to a lost world, ancient wisdom, and a love story that began long before he was born. The $50 ranch would cost him everything he thought he knew about life and give him something worth far more than money could ever buy. This is the true story of how one desperate cowboy's last gamble uncovered one of the most remarkable secrets in the American Southwest, and how 3 extraordinary women changed not just his life, but the fate of an entire people's legacy. Jake Morrison's boots crunched against the gravel outside the Circle K gas station as he counted the crumpled bills in his wallet for the 3rd time. $53. That was all that stood between him and complete ruin. His last job at the Diamond Bar Ranch had ended 2 weeks ago when the owner sold out to developers, and since then, Jake had been living in his 1987 Ford pickup, surviving on gas station coffee and whatever food he could afford. The newspaper lay folded on the passenger seat where he'd left it that morning. He'd been scanning the classifieds for ranch work, anything that would put him back on a horse and under the open sky. That's when he saw it, the ad that made no sense. Ranch for sale, $50. Serious buyers only. Cash. Call Maria Santos. There was a phone number, nothing more. Jake stared at the ad until the words blurred. $50 for a ranch? It had to be a mistake, or maybe some kind of scam. But what did he have to lose? He was already at rock bottom. He walked to the payphone outside the gas station and dialed the number with hands that shook slightly from too much caffeine and too little food. The phone rang twice before a woman's voice answered, heavily accented but clear. Hello? Ma'am, I'm calling about the ranch for sale. The ad in the paper? There was a long pause. You have $50 cash? Yes, ma'am, I do. Can you meet today? Before sunset? Jake glanced at his watch. It was already past 3 in the afternoon. Where at? Drive south on Highway 85 from Phoenix. After you pass Gila Bend, look for mile marker 127. There's a dirt road that goes east into the desert. Follow it for exactly 7 miles. You'll see a mailbox shaped like a cactus. That's where I'll be waiting. The line went dead. Jake stared at the receiver for a moment, then hung up. 7 miles into the desert on a dirt road? This was either the deal of a lifetime or the setup for his own murder. But, as he looked around at the gas station, at the endless strip of fast food joints and car lots that stretched toward Phoenix, he knew he didn't have much choice. He'd rather die in the desert than waste away in the city. The drive south took him through landscape that grew more desolate with each mile. Past Gila Bend, the desert opened up into vast stretches of sand and sagebrush, punctuated by the occasional saguaro cactus standing like a lonely sentinel against the sky. The mountains in the distance wavered in the heat, and Jake's truck thermometer climbed steadily toward the red zone. He found mile marker 127 just as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. The dirt road was barely visible, 2 tire tracks separated by a strip of desert grass. Jake turned east and drove slowly, his truck bouncing over rocks and washouts. Dust billowed behind him in a brown cloud that stretched back toward the highway. The desert here was different from anything Jake had seen before. It felt older somehow, untouched by the modern world. Ancient-looking rock formations jutted up from the earth like sleeping giants, and, in the distance, a line of mountains created a jagged silhouette against the sky. The only sounds were the rumble of his engine and the whisper of wind through the creosote bushes. after exactly 7 miles, he saw it, a mailbox welded to look like a barrel cactus, complete with metal spines painted green and yellow. Beside it sat an old wooden fence post with a hand-carved sign that read Santos Ranch EST 1953. Beyond the mailbox, a narrow trail led deeper into the desert toward a cluster of buildings barely visible in the distance. As Jake pulled up and turned off his engine, the silence hit him like a physical force. No traffic, no sirens, no machinery, just the vast quiet of the desert. He stepped out of the truck and immediately felt the dry heat wrap around him like a blanket. The air smelled of sage and dust and something else, something ancient and indefinable. "You must be the cowboy." Jake spun around. An elderly Hispanic woman had appeared beside his truck as silently as smoke. She was small and weathered, probably in her 70s, with silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her eyes were dark and sharp, taking in everything about him in a single glance. She wore a faded blue dress and practical boots, and moved with the easy confidence of someone who belonged completely to this harsh landscape. "Yes, ma'am." "Jake Morrison." He touched the brim of his hat. "You're Maria Santos?" She nodded. "You brought the money?" Jake pulled out his wallet and showed her the bills. $50, just like you said." "But, ma'am, I have to ask, what's the catch?" "Land out here has got to be worth more than $50. Maria Santos studied him for a long moment. "Walk with me," she said finally. "I want to show you something." She turned and started down the trail toward the distant buildings. Jake hesitated, then locked his truck and followed. The trail was well worn but narrow, winding between stands of cholla and palo verde trees. As they walked, Maria spoke without looking back. "This land has been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather bought it from a man who needed money fast, just after the war. The Second World War. Back then, this whole area was different. There was water here, springs that bubbled up from deep underground. My family raised cattle, grew crops in the good years." "What happened?" Jake asked. "Time happened. Drought happened. The government happened." Her voice carried a note of old bitterness. "They built a dam upstream, diverted the water. Said it was for the good of more people. Maybe that's true. But it killed this land." They crested a small hill, and Jake saw the ranch spread out below them. It was bigger than he'd expected, a main house, a barn, corrals, and several smaller outbuildings. But everything looked abandoned, weathered by years of sun and wind. The corrals were empty, their wooden rails bleached white as bone. Tumbleweeds had piled against the barn doors, and several windows in the main house were boarded up. "Looks like it's been empty for a while," Jake observed. 5 years, Maria confirmed. "Ever since my husband died. I tried to keep it going, but I'm too old, and my children, they moved to the city long ago. This place means nothing to them." They walked down toward the main house, a low adobe structure with a red tile roof and a white front porch. Despite its abandonment, Jake could see that it had been built well. The walls were thick, designed to keep out the desert heat, and the architecture had a timeless quality that seemed to belong to the landscape. "The house has electricity," Maria said, as if reading his thoughts. "Solar panels and a generator. There's a well with a pump, though it's not the artesian spring it used to be. You'll have to be careful with water." "Ma'am," Jake said, stopping in front of the porch steps. "I appreciate you showing me all this, but I still don't understand. Why $50? This place has got to be worth something, even in rough shape." Maria Santos turned to face him fully for the first time since they'd met. Her dark eyes seemed to be looking not just at him, but into him, reading something written in a language he didn't understand. "Because I'm not really selling it to you," she said quietly. "I'm giving it to you. The $50 is just to make it legal, to satisfy the lawyers and the county records office. The real question is whether you're the right person to receive it." "I don't understand." "This land holds secrets, Mr. Morrison. Old secrets. Sacred secrets. My family has been protecting something here for 70 years, something that was entrusted to us by people who had nowhere else to turn. Now I'm old, and my time as protector is ending. I need someone to take my place. Jake felt a chill despite the desert heat. What kind of secrets? Instead of answering, Maria walked up onto the porch and produced a key from her dress pocket. She unlocked the front door, which opened with a creak of old hinges. Come inside. There are people you need to meet. The interior of the house was cool and shadowy after the bright desert sun. Jake's eyes adjusted slowly, taking in a living room furnished with handmade wooden furniture and Native American rugs. The walls were decorated with old photographs, images of the ranch in its heyday, cattle grazing in green pastures that seemed impossible in this now barren landscape. But it was the three women sitting in the living room who made Jake stop in his tracks. They were clearly Native American, probably Apache based on their features and the style of their traditional jewelry. All three appeared to be elderly, though their exact ages were impossible to determine. They sat in straight-backed chairs arranged in a semicircle, and they watched Jake with expressions of intense interest and something that might have been hope. Jake Morrison, Maria said formally, I'd like you to meet Ayanna, Chenoa, and Dakota. They've been waiting to meet you. The woman in the center, who seemed to be the eldest, spoke in a voice like wine through canyon walls. We have been waiting a very long time, young cowboy. The question is, are you ready for what you're about to learn? Jake looked around the room at Maria Santos with her knowing eyes, at the three Apache women who somehow seemed both ancient and timeless, at the photographs on the walls that showed a green and living version of the desert wasteland outside. He thought about his empty wallet, his homeless existence, his complete lack of options. Ma'am, he said finally, I reckon I'm ready for just about anything. The eldest woman smiled, and, for a moment, her weathered face transformed into something beautiful and ageless. Good, she said. Because everything you think you know about this land, about its history, about why we're here, all of that is about to change. She gestured to an empty chair. Sit down, Jake Morrison. Let us tell you the real story of the Santos Ranch, and why you were meant to find that newspaper ad today. As Jake lowered himself into the chair, he had the distinct feeling that his old life was ending and something entirely new was about to begin. Outside, the desert wind had picked up, rattling the windows and sending tumbleweeds rolling across the empty yard like ghostly messengers carrying news of change. The eldest woman, Ayanna, reached into a beaded pouch at her waist and withdrew a bundle wrapped in soft deerskin. She held it reverently, as if it contained something infinitely precious. Before we tell you our story, she said, her voice carrying the weight of years, you must understand that what we're about to share has been hidden from the world for 7 decades. There are people who would kill to possess what we protect, and others who would destroy it rather than let it survive. Jake shifted in his chair, suddenly aware of how isolated they were out here in the desert. Ma'am, I'm just a cowboy looking for work and a place to live. I don't know anything about hidden treasures, or it's not treasure in the way you mean, interrupted the second woman, Chenoa. Her voice was softer than Ayanna's but carried an intensity that made Jake pay attention. What we guard is worth more than gold or silver. It's the memory of our people, the record of what really happened here. Dakota, the youngest of the three, leaned forward. Do you know the history of this area, Jake Morrison? What the government records say happened to the Apache people in the 1950s? Jake shook his head. Can't say I do. I know there were Indian wars way back, and reservations got established, but the official story, Ayanna said, her tone bitter, is that by 1950, all Apache people had been successfully relocated to designated reservations in New Mexico and Oklahoma. The government declared this region cleared for development and white settlement. They issued death certificates for Apache communities that had supposedly died out or moved away decades earlier. But that wasn't the truth, Chenoa continued. Small groups of our people had been living in hidden canyons and remote desert areas for generations, maintaining the old ways, staying connected to our ancestral lands. The government knew we existed, but finding us in this vast wilderness would have been expensive and difficult. Dakota's eyes flashed with old anger. So they decided to use a different strategy. They couldn't hunt us down individually, but they could make it impossible for us to survive. They diverted the water sources, brought in cattle to overgraze the land, and made it illegal for anyone to employ or shelter Apache people. Jake was beginning to understand the scope of what they were describing.
They starved you out.
Exactly, Ayanna confirmed. By the winter of 1954, the 3 remaining hidden communities were facing extinction. Our children were dying of hunger and disease. The elders knew that we faced a choice: surrender to the reservations and lose our culture forever, or find a way to preserve it until times changed. Maria Santos, who had been listening silently from the doorway, stepped forward.
That's when they came to my grandfather, Miguel Santos. Your grandfather knew about the Apache communities?
He was one of the few Mexican ranchers who had refused to cooperate with the government's plan, Maria explained. While other landowners were being paid to drive Apache people off their property, Miguel was secretly providing food and medical supplies to the hidden communities.
Ayanna unwrapped the deerskin bundle, revealing a collection of items that made Jake's breath catch.
There were carved wooden artifacts covered in intricate symbols, rolls of what looked like hand-drawn maps, and bundles of papers covered in both Apache script and English writing. In February 1954, Ayanna said, the leaders of our 3 communities made a desperate decision. Rather than watch our culture die with us, we would entrust our most sacred possessions to someone we hoped would protect them until our people could reclaim them.
What kind of possessions?
Jake asked, leaning forward despite himself.
Everything, Chenoa said simply.
Our oral histories written down by educated members of our communities. Maps showing the location of burial grounds, sacred sites, and hidden caches of artifacts that the government had been trying to find and destroy for decades. Records of our real population numbers, our true history, the location of survivors.
Dakota picked up one of the rolled papers and carefully unrolled it on the coffee table.
Jake found himself looking at an incredibly detailed map of the region, far more precise than anything he'd ever seen. It showed not just mountains and rivers, but hidden springs, secret trails, caves, and dozens of locations marked with Apache symbols.
This is just one of 47 maps, Dakota explained. Together, they document the true Apache presence in this region going back over 400 years.
They show where our ancestors lived, where they're buried, where they hid during the cavalry raids of the 1880s. And this, Ayanna said, indicating a collection of wooden tablets covered with carved symbols, is our historical record. Not the version written by government ethnologists and soldiers, but our own account of what really happened during the Apache Wars, during the early days of white settlement, during the period when we were supposedly extinct. Jake stared at the artifacts spread across the table. Even to his untrained eye, they looked authentic and incredibly old.
Why are you showing me this? Why are you trusting me with it? Because, Maria said, my grandfather made a promise.
He swore that he would protect these materials until the Apache people could safely reclaim them. But he also promised something else. He gave his word that if his family line ever could no longer fulfill this obligation, he would find someone worthy to take our place. The 3 communities scattered to survive, Chenoa explained. Some families made it to official reservations. Others melted into Mexican and white communities, hiding their identity to protect their children. A few individuals, like us, remained in the desert to watch over the sacred sites and wait for the time when it would be safe to reveal the truth.
You're saying you've been living out here in secret for 70 years? Jake asked incredulously. Not in secret from everyone, Dakota clarified. The Santos family has known.
They've been bringing us supplies, medical care when needed, news from the outside world. But, yes, officially, we don't exist. We have no government records, no social security numbers, no legal identity in the white man's world.
Ayanna stood and walked to one of the boarded windows. But times are changing. There's a new generation of Apache leaders working to reclaim our stolen history. Museums and universities are finally beginning to admit that the official records were incomplete or false.
The legal climate is shifting in ways that might allow us to reveal the truth about what happened here.
We're old, Chenoa added quietly. Ayanna is 87. I'm 81. Dakota is the baby at 76. We won't live much longer, and, when we die, the knowledge we carry dies with us.
Unless, Dakota said, looking directly at Jake, we can transfer our guardianship to someone younger, someone who can bridge the gap between our world and the modern one. Jake felt the weight of their expectations settling on him like a lead blanket. Ladies, I'm honored that you'd consider me, but I'm nobody special. I'm a broke cowboy who couldn't even keep his last job. What makes you think I'm the right person for something this important? Ayana returned to her chair and fixed him with those dark, penetrating eyes. Maria's grandfather didn't choose randomly when he made his original promise. He was selected because our medicine woman, my grandmother, had a vision about him. She saw him in a dream before she ever met him, saw that he was a man who would keep his word even when it cost him everything. Maria had the same vision about you 3 months ago, Chenoa said. She saw a cowboy in an old blue truck, wearing a hat with a silver band, driving alone through the desert. She saw him finding the newspaper ad, making the phone call, coming to this place. Jake's hand instinctively went to his hat, feeling the silver band that had been his father's. That's not possible. Many things are possible that the modern world has forgotten, Dakota said gently. The question is whether you're willing to accept the responsibility that comes with this knowledge. What exactly would that responsibility be? Jake asked. Maria Santos spoke for the first time in several minutes. To live on this land and protect what's hidden here. To learn the full extent of what these women have preserved, and to help them decide when and how to reveal it to the world. To serve as a bridge between the Apache survivors and the legal system when the time comes to reclaim their heritage. The Santos Ranch sits on top of one of the most important archaeological sites in North America, Ayana explained. Beneath us are burial caves that contain artifacts going back over 1,000 years. In the hills behind the house are hidden storage areas where our people concealed sacred objects during the cavalry raids. This entire valley is a museum of Apache culture that has never been plundered or corrupted by white archaeology. And, Chenoa added with a slight smile, there are practical considerations as well. The land comes with mineral rights. There's silver in these hills, maybe gold as well. If you ever needed money to fund legal battles or archaeological expeditions, the resources are here. Jake's mind was spinning. You're telling me that this $50 ranch sits on top of silver mines and hidden Apache treasures? We're telling you, Dakota said, that you have a choice to make. You can take the land deed, sell it to developers for whatever you can get, and walk away from all of this. Or you can accept the role that fate seems to have prepared for you. What would my life look like if I said yes? Jake asked. Complicated, Ayana admitted. You'd be living in secret until we decide the time is right to reveal the truth. You'd be learning Apache history and culture, helping us document everything we've preserved before it's lost forever. You'd be preparing for the legal battles that will inevitably come when we challenge the official historical record. But, you'd also be living on beautiful land that would truly belong to you, Maria added. You'd be part of something larger than yourself, something that could reshape how America understands its treatment of indigenous people. And, Chenoa said with a warmth that made her seem decades younger, you'd never be alone again. We three are family now, the last of our original communities. If you accept this responsibility, you become family too. Jake stood and walked to the same window where Ayana had been standing. Through the gaps in the boards, he could see the desert stretching endlessly toward the mountains. It was harsh, unforgiving country, but there was something about it that called to him. Maybe it was the silence, so different from the constant noise of the modern world. Maybe it was the sense of history that seemed to hang in the air like heat shimmer. How do I know you're telling me the truth? He asked without turning around. How do I know this isn't some elaborate scam? You don't, Ayana said simply. Faith is required. But, Jake Morrison, answer me this, when you saw that newspaper ad, did it feel like chance? When you drove out here into the middle of nowhere to meet a stranger, did that feel like your normal behavior? Jake had to admit it didn't. He'd always been a careful man, suspicious of offers that seemed too good to be true. But, something about that ad had compelled him to act. There's something else, Dakota said quietly. Something we haven't told you yet. Jake turned back to face them. The vision Maria had about you didn't end with you coming here, she continued. It showed you staying, showed you learning our ways, showed you. She hesitated, glancing at the other women. What? Jake prompted. It showed you finding love in this place, Chenoa finished gently. Not just love for the land or for our cause, but the kind of love that makes a man feel complete. Jake felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment. Ma'am, I appreciate the sentiment, but there's not exactly a long line of eligible women out here in the middle of the desert. The three Apache women exchanged a look that Jake couldn't interpret. Perhaps, Ayanna said mysteriously, there are more secrets yet to be revealed. As if on cue, the sound of a vehicle approaching broke the desert silence. Jake heard the rumble of an engine, the crunch of tires on gravel. Through the window, he saw a dust cloud moving toward the house. Who's that? He asked. Maria Santos smiled for the first time since he'd met her. That would be my granddaughter, Elena. She drives out from Phoenix every Monday to check on our guests and to bring supplies. She should be arriving just about now. The sound of footsteps on the porch was followed by the screen door opening. Jake turned toward the entrance and felt his world tilt sideways. The young woman who walked into the living room was breathtakingly beautiful, with long black hair and dark eyes that seemed to hold depths Jake could spend a lifetime exploring. She was probably in her late 20s, with the kind of natural grace that came from growing up in wild places. She wore jeans and a simple white blouse, but she carried herself like royalty. Grandmother, she said, then stopped when she saw Jake. Her eyes widened with surprise and something else, recognition, as if she'd been expecting him. Elena, Maria said with obvious pleasure, I'd like you to meet Jake Morrison. He's here about the ranch. Elena Santos extended her hand, and, when Jake shook it, he felt a jolt like electricity. Her skin was warm and soft, but her grip was strong. Jake, she said, and he loved the way his name sounded in her voice. Welcome to the Santos Ranch. I hope my grandmother has been taking good care of you. As Jake looked into Elena's eyes, he heard Takota's voice in the back of his mind, the vision showed you finding love in this place. For the first time since he'd read that newspaper ad, Jake Morrison began to think that maybe, just maybe, fate had led him exactly where he belonged. Elena Santos moved through the house with the familiar ease of someone who had been visiting this place her entire life. She carried a canvas bag filled with supplies, canned goods, fresh vegetables, batteries, and medical supplies, which she began distributing with practiced efficiency. How has everyone been feeling this week? She asked the three Apache women, switching effortlessly between English and what Jake assumed was Apache language. He watched her check their blood pressure with a portable monitor, examine their hands for any signs of arthritis pain, and listen attentively as each woman reported on their health. You're a doctor? Jake asked when she finished her examinations. Nurse practitioner, Elena corrected. I work at Phoenix General, but I specialize in geriatric care and Native American health issues. She paused, studying his face. Grandmother says you're thinking about buying the ranch. Already bought it, actually, Jake said, pulling the deed from his pocket. Maria had insisted on completing the paperwork immediately after the introductions were finished. Though I'm starting to think I may have gotten more than I bargained for. Elena's smile was warm but knowing. The Santos land has a way of demanding more from people than they expect to give. She glanced at the artifacts still spread across the coffee table. I see they've told you about our houseguests. Some of it, Jake said. Though I get the feeling there's still more I don't know. Much more, Ayanna confirmed. We've shared the history, but we haven't yet shown you the responsibility. What do you mean? Jake asked. Chenoa stood, her movements surprisingly fluid for someone her age. Come with us. It's time you saw what lies beneath. The group filed out of the house into the afternoon desert sun. Elena fell into step beside Jake as they followed the three older women toward the barn. How long have you known about all this? Jake asked her quietly. My whole life, Elena replied. I grew up hearing stories about the hidden communities, about the artifacts my great-grandfather was protecting. When I was little, I thought every ranch had secret Apache grandmothers living in the desert behind it. And you're okay with it? Living with such a huge secret? Elena stopped walking and turned to face him. Jake, what do you know about modern Apache people? About what our lives are like on the reservations? Honestly? Not much. Poverty. Alcoholism. Suicide rates that are 3 times the national average. Loss of language, loss of culture, loss of connection to the land that shaped us for thousands of years. Her voice carried a pain that Jake could feel in his own chest. The government's plan to destroy Apache culture by scattering our people worked better than they ever imagined. They resumed walking toward the barn. But, here, Elena continued, gesturing toward the 3 women ahead of them, here we have Apache elders who remember the old ways, who never lost their connection to the land, who preserved knowledge that died out everywhere else. This isn't just a secret I'm keeping, it's hope for cultural revival that could benefit Apache people everywhere. The barn was larger than it had appeared from a distance, built from local stone and weathered wood. Chenoa produced an old brass key and unlocked a heavy wooden door that opened with surprising smoothness. The interior was not what Jake expected. Instead of hay bales and farm equipment, the barn contained what looked like a combination museum and laboratory. Tables lined the walls, covered with carefully organized artifacts, maps, and documents. Shelves held pottery, tools, jewelry, and ceremonial objects that even Jake's untrained eye could tell were incredibly ancient. This is where we've been cataloging everything, Dakota explained. For 70 years, we've been organizing, preserving, and documenting every piece of our heritage that the original communities entrusted to us. Elena moved to one of the tables and picked up a leather-bound journal. This contains genealogical records going back 12 generations. Names, birthdates, family connections, tribal affiliations, information that the government claimed didn't exist. And this, Ayana said, indicating a collection of stone tablets covered with symbols, is our calendar system. Not the simplified version that appears in anthropology textbooks, but the complete astronomical and agricultural cycle that guided Apache life for centuries. Jake moved slowly through the barn, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of preserved history. There were weapons that looked like they'd been made yesterday but were probably centuries old. Clothing that maintained its intricate beadwork despite obvious age. Photographs of Apache people that contradicted everything he'd read about the timeline of their displacement. How much of this is there, he asked. What you see here is maybe 1/10, Chenoa replied. The rest is hidden in caves and buried storage areas throughout the valley. We've never brought it all together in one place, too dangerous. If something happened to the barn, we'd lose everything. Which brings us to why you're really here, Ayana said. We're too old to continue this work. Our memories are beginning to fade, our bodies can't handle the physical demands of maintaining the hidden storage sites. We need someone younger to learn the locations, to understand the preservation systems, to take over the guardianship. Elena opened another journal and showed Jake pages covered with detailed drawings. These are maps showing the location of every hidden site. Caves sealed with stone that matched the surrounding rock faces so perfectly that you'd walk past them without noticing. Underground chambers accessed through passages that look like natural cracks in canyon walls. The original communities were brilliant, Dakota said with obvious pride. They knew that someday, their descendants would need to prove their connection to this land. So they created a preservation system that could survive centuries without maintenance. Jake studied one of the maps, trying to understand the scale of what he was seeing. How many sites are there? 47 major locations, Ayana replied. Some contain artifacts, some contain human remains, some contain both. Together, they represent the most complete record of Apache life in this region that exists anywhere in the world. And, it's all illegal, Elena added quietly. According to federal law, any Native American artifacts found on private land belong to the landowner, but only if they report the discovery to the appropriate authorities. Archaeological sites that aren't reported are considered looted, and anyone involved in concealing them can face federal charges. Jake felt a cold knot form in his stomach. You're saying I could go to prison for this? If the wrong people found out, yes, Maria admitted. But there are legal ways to resolve the situation. Federal law has changed significantly in the past 30 years. The Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act gives tribal communities much more control over their own artifacts and burial sites.
The problem, Chenoa explained, is that these materials predate the formation of any federally recognized Apache tribe.
They belong to communities that officially never existed, preserved by people who have no legal identity in the modern world.
So we need to establish legal standing first, Elena said.
Prove that the hidden communities existed, prove our connection to them, prove our right to reclaim what was preserved. Jake was beginning to understand the complexity of what he'd walked into.
That's why you need the ranch to stay in sympathetic hands.
You need a legal base of operations while you work through the courts.
Exactly, Ayana confirmed.
And, more than that, we need someone who can serve as a bridge between our world and the legal system. Someone who understands both cultures, who can translate between them.
But, I don't understand Apache culture, Jake protested. I'm just a cowboy. Not yet, Dakota said with a smile. But, you could learn. We could teach you. Elena closed the journal she'd been holding and looked directly at Jake. The question is whether you want to learn. Whether you're willing to let your life change completely. Before Jake could answer, a low rumbling sound echoed through the barn.
The artifacts on the tables rattled slightly, and dust drifted down from the rafters.
What was that? Jake asked.
The five of them hurried outside, where the rumbling had grown louder. In the distance, toward the highway, Jake could see a dust cloud much larger than the one his truck had raised.
Multiple vehicles were approaching fast.
Who else knows about this place? He asked Maria. No one should, she replied, but her voice carried worry.
Elena, get the truck ready.
Ayana, Chenoa, Dakota, go to the safe house.
What safe house? Jake demanded.
There's a hidden shelter built into the rocks behind the main house, Elena explained quickly. Supplied with food and water, invisible from the air.
The elders can hide there for weeks if necessary.
The three Apache women moved with surprising speed and purpose, clearly following a plan they'd rehearsed many times. Within minutes, they'd gathered essential items from the barn and disappeared into what looked like solid rock face behind the house.
What about all this? Jake gestured toward the barn full of artifacts. Leave it, Maria said grimly. If these are the wrong people, we don't want to be caught moving anything.
We have to trust that they'll see a rundown ranch and an empty barn, nothing more. The vehicles were close enough now that Jake could count them, 3 black SUVs with government plates, moving in formation like a military convoy. They pulled up in a cloud of dust and disgorged men in dark suits who immediately began surveying the property with the practiced eyes of federal agents. The lead agent approached the group with a folder in his hand and an expression that suggested this was not a social visit.
Good afternoon, he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. I'm Agent Morrison with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. We've received reports of possible illegal archaeological activity on this property. Jake's blood turned to ice.
The agent had the same last name he did.
Coincidence, or something more sinister? I don't know what you mean, Maria said calmly. This is just a cattle ranch. Agent Morrison opened his folder and withdrew several aerial photographs.
These satellite images show unusual excavation patterns on your land, patterns consistent with artifact hunting or illegal archaeological digs. Elena stepped forward, and Jake noticed she'd positioned herself to block the agent's view of the barn entrance. Sir, this property has been in my family for generations. The only digging here has been for fence posts and well maintenance.
I see, the agent said, not looking convinced. And you are? Elena Santos.
My grandmother owns this ranch.
Agent Morrison made a note in his folder. Ms. Santos, I notice you work at Phoenix General Hospital.
Specifically in a department that provides services to Native American communities.
Jake felt the situation taking an ominous turn.
This wasn't a random investigation, these agents had done their homework.
That's correct, Elena replied evenly. And, I suppose it's also a coincidence that several Apache activists have been asking questions about missing historical records from this exact region?
I wouldn't know anything about that, Elena said, but Jake could hear the tension in her voice. Agent Morrison turned his attention to Jake. "And, you are?" "Jake Morrison. I just bought this place today." Jake handed over the deed, hoping his nervousness wasn't obvious. The agent examined the paperwork with interest. "Bought it for $50, I see. Quite a bargain for 640 acres of Arizona desert." "It's pretty rough country," Jake said. "Not worth much for anything except maybe running a few head of cattle." Agent Morrison returned the deed but kept his eyes on Jake. "It's interesting that you share my last name, Mr. Morrison. Are you related to Colonel James Morrison, by any chance?" Jake's heart sank. Colonel James Morrison had been his great-grandfather, a cavalry officer who had participated in the Apache campaigns of the 1880s. It was not a family connection he was proud of, and certainly not one he wanted to discuss in this context. "Might be a distant relation," Jake said carefully. Agent Morrison's smile was cold. "Colonel Morrison was quite famous in these parts. Killed quite a few Apache warriors, burned quite a few villages. Some people might say his great-grandson buying land in traditional Apache territory is ironic." The weight of history pressed down on Jake like a physical force. His great-grandfather had helped drive Apache people from their homes, and now here he was, being asked to protect their most sacred possessions. "Agent Morrison," Maria interjected, "what exactly are you looking for here?" "Evidence of federal crimes, Ms. Santos. Specifically, the theft and concealment of Native American artifacts and human remains. We have reason to believe that materials looted from archaeological sites have been hidden on this property for decades." One of the other agents approached and whispered something in Morrison's ear. The lead agent nodded and turned back to the group. "We'll be conducting a full search of the property," he announced. "I suggest you cooperate fully. Federal charges for archaeological theft carry sentences of up to 10 years in prison." As the agents began spreading out across the ranch, Jake caught Elena's eye. She mouthed silently, "Trust me." But, as he watched federal agents walking toward the barn that contained enough illegal artifacts to put them all in prison for life, Jake wondered if trust would be enough to get them through what was coming next. In the distance, thunder rumbled across the desert, though there wasn't a cloud in the sky. The sound seemed to come from the earth itself, as if the land was awakening to defend its secrets. The federal agents moved across the property with methodical precision, photographing everything, taking soil samples, and using handheld devices that beeped ominously as they swept the ground. Jake watched Agent Morrison direct his team with growing dread. These weren't casual investigators, they knew exactly what they were looking for. "Elena," Jake whispered as they stood on the front porch, watching the search, "how long before they find the barn?" "They already know about the barn," she whispered back. "Look at their pattern. They're not searching randomly, they're following a predetermined plan." She was right. The agents were moving in a coordinated sweep that would inevitably lead them to every building on the property. Jake estimated they had maybe 20 minutes before the barn was breached. "Miss Santos," Agent Morrison called from across the yard. "I need to ask you some specific questions about your family's history with this property." Elena descended the porch steps to meet him, and Jake followed. Maria remained on the porch, her face a mask of calm that Jake admired but couldn't emulate. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. "Your great-grandfather, Miguel Santos," Morrison began, consulting his folder, "purchased this land in 1954 from a man named William Garrett. According to our records, Garrett sold the property for significantly below market value and left the state immediately afterward. Do you know why?" "I wouldn't know anything about business deals from 70 years ago," Elena replied. "But, you must know the family stories," Morrison pressed. "Surely your grandmother has told you about the early days of the ranch?" Jake watched Elena's face carefully. She was maintaining her composure, but he could see the strain around her eyes. "My great-grandfather was a good man who treated everyone fairly," she said. "That's all I know." "Including the Apache people who were supposedly extinct in this area by 1954? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jake saw Elena's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly.
I don't know what you mean, she said. Agent Morrison turned to Jake. Mr. Morrison, what made you decide to buy this particular piece of property? It's quite remote, quite isolated.
Not the kind of place most people would choose for a new start.
Jake had been dreading this question. I saw an ad in the paper.
The price was right, and I needed a place to live.
Just a random ad? You didn't seek out this specific property for any particular reason?
No, sir. Because it would be quite a coincidence if a descendant of Colonel James Morrison randomly ended up owning land in the heart of the area where his ancestor fought Apache warriors.
Jake felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the dry desert air. Like I said, I might be distantly related to the colonel. Common last name.
Agent Morrison studied him for a long moment, then made another note in his folder.
Mr. Morrison, are you aware that federal law requires immediate reporting of any Native American artifacts or human remains found on private property?
Yes, sir.
And you haven't found anything like that since taking possession of this land today? Jake's mouth was dry as dust.
No, sir.
What about that building over there?
Morrison indicated the barn with a nod.
Have you been inside it yet?
This was the moment Jake had been dreading. If he said yes, they'd want to know what he'd seen. If he said no, they'd insist on searching it immediately.
Just briefly, he said. Looked like old farm equipment mostly.
I see. Well, we'll be conducting a thorough search shortly.
I trust you have no objections to that?
It's your ranch now, Mr. Morrison, Elena said quickly. You have the right to refuse a search without a warrant.
Agent Morrison's smile was predatory.
That's true, Mr. Morrison.
You could refuse. But that would certainly give us grounds for suspicion, wouldn't it? Make us wonder what you might be hiding in there.
Jake was trapped. Refusing the search would only delay the inevitable and make them look more guilty. Allowing it would expose 70 years of preserved Apache heritage to federal agents who clearly had their own agenda. Before he could answer, a new sound cut through the desert air, the distinctive whoop-whoop-whoop of helicopter rotor blades. Everyone looked up to see a news helicopter approaching from the east.
What the hell? Agent Morrison muttered, reaching for his radio.
The helicopter circled the property twice before landing in the open area near the highway. Jake watched in amazement as reporters and camera crews piled out and began setting up equipment.
Agent Morrison, Elena called sweetly, it looks like you have visitors.
The lead agent spoke rapidly into his radio, his calm demeanor cracking for the first time.
Base, this is Morrison. We have media on site. I repeat, we have media on site. How did they know we were here?
A young reporter with perfect hair and an expensive suit began walking toward them, followed by a camera operator.
Agent Morrison moved to intercept them.
Sir, you're on private property, Morrison said.
You need to leave immediately.
Actually, the reporter replied with a confident smile, we have permission from the property owner.
Mr. Morrison invited us here to document what he calls government harassment of Native American heritage preservation efforts. Jake's mouth fell open.
He had done no such thing, but he caught Elena's small nod and realized this was part of whatever plan she'd been formulating.
Mr. Morrison, the reporter continued, approaching with microphone extended, can you tell our viewers about your decision to purchase this historic Apache land and your commitment to preserving Native American culture?
Jake stammered. Mr. Morrison has made a remarkable discovery, Elena interjected, stepping smoothly into camera range. After purchasing this ranch today, he found evidence of previously unknown Apache historical sites that the federal government appears determined to suppress.
Agent Morrison's face was turning red.
Ma'am, you cannot make statements like that without evidence.
Evidence? Elena's voice carried perfect innocence. You mean like the satellite photos you've been waving around? The ones that show supposed illegal excavation but could just as easily show natural erosion patterns? Or do you mean the kind of evidence that would hold up in court?
The reporter sensed a story developing.
Agent Morrison, is it true that the Bureau of Indian Affairs is conducting an illegal search of private property without a warrant? We have probable cause, Morrison began. Based on what? Elena interrupted. Aerial photographs that show normal ranch activities? The fact that my family has been living on this land for 3 generations? Or is this really about suppressing Apache claims to traditional territory? Jake watched in amazement as Elena skillfully turned the tables.
Within minutes, she had transformed them from suspected criminals into victims of government overreach.
Mr. Morrison, the reporter asked, what is your response to allegations that you're involved in illegal archaeological activities? Jake found his voice.
I bought this ranch this morning for $50 because the previous owner wanted it to go to someone who would respect its history. If there are archaeological sites here, they should be preserved and protected, not destroyed by government agents who seem more interested in making arrests than preserving Native American heritage. He surprised himself with the conviction in his voice. The words felt true as he spoke them.
Agent Morrison's radio crackled with urgent voices.
Jake couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. This situation was rapidly spinning out of control. Sir, one of Morrison's subordinates approached quietly, we're getting calls from Washington. They want to know why we're conducting an unscheduled media event.
Morrison's jaw worked soundlessly for a moment. Pack it up, he said finally. We're leaving.
Sir, the subordinate looked confused.
I said pack it up. We'll be back with proper warrants and a full archaeological team. The reporter pounced. Agent Morrison, are you ending your search because you found evidence of government wrongdoing? Are you concerned about legal challenges to federal authority over Native American heritage sites?
Morrison ignored the questions and stalked toward his vehicles. Within 10 minutes, the federal agents had loaded their equipment and departed, leaving dust clouds and tire tracks as the only evidence of their visit. As the government vehicles disappeared toward the highway, Jake felt his legs go weak with relief. They had somehow survived the encounter, but he knew it was only temporary. Morrison would be back, and next time he'd be better prepared.
Elena, he said as the news crew finished their interviews and packed up their equipment, how did you arrange all this?
She smiled for the first time all day.
I called in some favors.
There are people in Phoenix who have been waiting years for a chance to challenge federal overreach in Native American affairs. When I told them what was happening here, they were very interested.
But how did you know the agents were coming? We didn't, Maria said, joining them as the helicopter lifted off. But we've been preparing for this possibility for decades.
The hidden shelter, the emergency protocols, the legal contacts, it was all planned for a day like today.
Speaking of the shelter, Jake said, shouldn't we let the others know it's safe to come out? Elena shook her head. Not yet.
Morrison said he'd be back with warrants and a full team. We need to assume they're watching us now, probably with surveillance equipment we can't detect.
Jake looked around the seemingly empty desert with new paranoia. So what do we do? Now, Elena said, we implement the next phase of the plan.
Which is?
We go public. Completely, officially public.
We announce the existence of the preserved Apache heritage, we file legal claims for protection of the archaeological sites, and we challenge the federal government's authority to confiscate materials that rightfully belong to Native American communities.
Jake felt his world spinning again.
Elena, if we do that, we'll all end up in federal prison.
Not if we do it right, she said confidently.
The legal landscape has changed dramatically in the past 20 years. There are precedents now for Native American communities reclaiming their heritage from government agencies that have been suppressing it. But, the 3 women in the shelter, they have no legal identity.
How can they make claims if they don't officially exist?
Elena's smile was mysterious.
That's about to change too. I've been working with lawyers in Phoenix for the past year, documenting their existence, establishing their legal standing.
By the end of this week, Ayanna, Chenoa, and Dakota will have birth certificates, social security numbers, and full legal recognition as the last surviving members of the original hidden communities.
Jake stared at her in amazement. You've been planning this for a year? Longer than that, actually.
Ever since grandmother told me about her vision of the cowboy who would come to help us.
You mean you knew I was coming? Specifically me?
I knew someone was coming, Elena corrected. Someone who would give us the legal standing we needed to go public. Someone who would own the land and could invite in the right archaeologists, the right lawyers, the right media attention.
Maria nodded approvingly. The $50 sale wasn't just about transferring ownership, Jake. It was about creating an unbreakable legal foundation for what comes next.
As the sun began to set over the desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Jake realized that his life had changed far more dramatically than he'd ever imagined. He'd thought he was buying a simple ranch where he could live quietly and work with cattle. Instead, he'd become the center of what might become the most significant legal challenge to federal Indian policy in decades.
Elena, he said, there's something I need to know.
What's that?
When this all comes out, when the media attention really starts, when the legal battles begin, will you still be here? Or will you go back to your life in Phoenix?
She stepped closer to him, and, in the fading light, her eyes seemed to hold depths of warmth and promise. Jake Morrison, she said softly, I've been waiting my whole life for someone like you to come along. Someone who could help us reclaim our heritage, someone who could bridge the gap between our world and the legal system. She paused, reaching up to touch his cheek. But, more than that, I've been waiting for someone who could see past the complications and the dangers to what really matters.
And what's that? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper.
That some things are worth fighting for, no matter what it costs. That some stories need to be told, no matter who tries to silence them. That some people are worth loving, no matter how complicated their circumstances. As Jake looked into Elena's eyes, with the vast desert stretching around them and the first stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, he realized that Agent Morrison had been wrong about one thing. This was an irony, a descendant of Colonel Morrison ending up on Apache land. This was justice, finally, finding a way to balance the scales of history. The thunder rumbled again across the desert, closer this time, and Jake realized it wasn't thunder at all. It was the sound of drums, carried on the night wind from the hidden shelter where 3 Apache elders were celebrating the return of hope to their people. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, new complications. But tonight, for the first time in years, Jake Morrison felt like he was exactly where he belonged. 6 months later, the Santos Ranch looked nothing like the abandoned property Jake had first encountered. The main house had been restored to its original adobe beauty, with new solar panels gleaming on the roof and native plants flourishing in carefully tended gardens. The corrals held horses again, strong desert-bred animals that could navigate the rugged terrain with ease. But the most dramatic change was the presence of people. The Hidden Heritage Legal Center occupied a new building constructed using traditional Apache building techniques, staffed by Native American lawyers, historians, and archaeologists from across the Southwest. The old barn had been converted into a proper museum facility, climate-controlled and secure, where the preserved artifacts were finally being properly documented and displayed. Jake stood on the front porch in the early morning light, watching a team of Apache youth learn traditional pottery techniques from Ayana in the shade of a ramada they'd built near the main house. The sound of their laughter mixed with the rhythmic scraping of tools and the soft conversation in Apache language that was being preserved and taught here daily.
Hard to believe it's the same place, isn't it?
Elena's voice came from behind him. Jake turned to see his wife approaching with 2 cups of coffee. Even after 4 months of marriage, the sight of her still made his heart skip. She wore jeans and a work shirt, her long black hair pulled back practically, but she moved with the same grace that had captured his attention that first day. Sometimes I still can't believe any of this is real, Jake admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully.
6 months ago I was sleeping in my truck.
And now you're the co-director of the most successful Native American heritage reclamation project in the country, Elena said, settling beside him on the porch swing they'd installed.
Don't sell yourself short.
The legal battles had been intense but ultimately successful. Elena's careful documentation of the 3 elders' existence and heritage had provided the foundation for a landmark court case that recognized their right to reclaim the preserved materials. Agent Morrison had tried to fight the ruling, but the media attention and political pressure had eventually forced the Bureau of Indian Affairs to negotiate rather than continue a battle they were clearly losing.
The settlement had been unprecedented.
Not only had the Apache communities been granted full legal custody of their preserved heritage, but the federal government had agreed to fund the construction of the Heritage Center and provide ongoing support for cultural preservation efforts. The Santos Ranch had become the first privately owned land to be designated as a National Native American Heritage Preservation Site. Speaking of which, Elena continued, Dr. Yazzie called this morning.
The University Consortium wants to expand the archaeological program again. They're talking about bringing in 50 graduate students for the summer field school.
Jake nodded, still amazed at how quickly their quiet desert ranch had become a hub of academic and cultural activity.
3 major universities were now partnering with the Heritage Center, and applications for the Apache Cultural Immersion programs were coming from around the world.
What did you tell her? That we'd need to ask the council, Elena replied. The council consisted of the 3 Apache elders plus representatives from various Apache communities throughout the Southwest. Every major decision about the Heritage Center was made collectively, ensuring that the preserved culture remained under Native American control. The sound of approaching vehicles interrupted their conversation.
A convoy of white SUVs was making its way up the dirt road, the daily arrival of researchers, students, and visitors.
Jake still marveled at how normal it had become to see dozens of people arriving each morning to work on projects that 6 months ago had been the most closely guarded secret in Arizona.
There's Congressman Martinez, Elena observed, pointing to one of the vehicles.
He's probably here about the expansion of the heritage site designation. The political ramifications of their success had rippled far beyond Arizona. Native American communities across the country were using their legal precedent to challenge federal control over their own heritage materials. The case had become a model for how historical injustices could be addressed through cooperation rather than confrontation. As the vehicles parked and people began unloading equipment and supplies, Jake spotted a familiar figure among the researchers.
Dr.
Sarah Blackhorse, one of the leading Apache historians, approached the porch with a thick folder in her hands.
Good morning, Jake, Elena, she called. I have something I think you'll want to see.
They descended from the porch to meet her. Dr. Blackhorse was a compact woman in her 50s with silver-streaked black hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. She had been one of the first scholars to arrive after the Heritage Center opened, and her work documenting the preserved oral histories had already filled 3 academic journals.
What is it, Sarah? Elena asked.
We've been analyzing some of the documents from the deepest cave cache, Dr. Blackhorse said, opening her folder. Specifically, some papers that appear to be correspondence between Apache leaders and Mexican ranchers from the 1850s and 1860s. Jake leaned in to look at the photocopied documents. The pages were covered with faded handwriting in both English and Spanish. What we've found, Dr. Blackhorse continued, is evidence of a formal alliance between Apache communities and certain Mexican ranchers during the period of American territorial expansion. An alliance that included mutual defense pacts, shared water rights, and intermarriage agreements.
Intermarriage agreements? Elena asked with interest.
Formal contracts establishing which Apache families could marry into which Mexican families, with specific provisions for cultural preservation and land rights.
Dr. Blackhorse smiled.
Elena, one of these documents specifically mentions the Santos family.
Elena's eyes widened. What does it say?
According to this 1862 agreement, Miguel Santos, your great-great-grandfather, not your great-grandfather, married an Apache woman named Itzel from Ayana's community. The marriage was part of a formal alliance that gave the Santos family permanent protection rights over Apache heritage sites in this valley.
Jake felt goosebumps rise on his arms. You're saying Elena's family has Apache ancestry?
I'm saying Elena's family has been the legal protectors of this Apache heritage for over 160 years, not just 70, Dr. Blackhorse replied. The 1954 arrangement with Ayana's people wasn't the beginning of the relationship, it was the continuation of a bond that goes back 6 generations.
Elena sank onto the porch steps, looking stunned. Grandmother never told me any of this.
She probably didn't know, Dr. Blackhorse said gently. These documents were in the deepest cache, materials that were only entrusted to the most senior keepers of tradition. But there's more. She pulled out another document, this one more recent looking. This is a letter from 1923, written by Miguel Santos, the one you knew about, to his son. In it, he explains that the family's commitment to protecting Apache heritage isn't just about friendship or politics. It's about blood kinship and sacred obligation. Jake watched Elena process this information, saw the way her understanding of her own identity was shifting in real time. There's something else, Dr. Blackhorse continued. According to these records, Itzel Santos, your Apache ancestor, was a medicine woman and keeper of prophecies. Some of her visions are recorded in these documents. What kind of visions? Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew. Visions about the future of Apache people, about a time when their culture would be preserved and revitalized by an alliance between Apache women and a cowboy whose family had once been their enemy. Dr. Blackhorse looked directly at Jake. She specifically described a man whose ancestor had fought against Apache people but who would dedicate his life to preserving Apache heritage. The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. You're saying this was all predicted? I'm saying, Dr. Blackhorse replied, that your presence here, your marriage to Elena, the success of the Heritage Center, all of it appears to have been foreseen by Apache medicine women over a century ago. Elena stood up slowly, her face pale but resolute. I need to talk to the elders. Right now. They found Ayanna, Chenoa, and Dakota in the museum building, working with a team of young Apache people to catalog pottery fragments. When Elena explained what Dr. Blackhorse had discovered, the three women exchanged looks that spoke of secrets finally being revealed. We wondered when you would learn, Ayanna said quietly. We have been waiting for you to discover your true heritage. You knew? Elena asked. We suspected, Chenoa replied. Your grandmother looks very much like her Apache ancestors, though she may not realize it. The shape of her face, the way she moves through the desert, these things don't lie. Dakota smiled. And, when Jake arrived, when we saw the two of you together, we knew the prophecies were being fulfilled. What prophecies? Jake demanded. Ayanna stood and walked to a locked cabinet. From it, she withdrew a bundle wrapped in white deerskin. These are the vision records of Itzel Santos, your wife's ancestor. They have been waiting for the right time to be revealed. She unwrapped the bundle, revealing pages covered with symbols and drawings. Even to Jake's untrained eye, the artwork was extraordinary, detailed images of people and places that seemed to glow with spiritual significance. Itzel saw the coming troubles for our people, Ayanna explained, pointing to images that showed cavalry soldiers and burning villages. But she also saw the preservation time, when Apache culture would survive by going underground, protected by those who understood its value. And she saw the restoration time, Chenoa added, indicating drawings that showed the Heritage Center, the museum, the young people learning traditional skills. When the hidden knowledge would emerge and spread to help heal our people. Look at this, Dakota said, pointing to a detailed drawing of a man and woman standing together in front of a building that looked remarkably like the Heritage Center. She drew this vision in 1863. She saw Jake and Elena, saw their partnership in preserving Apache culture. Jake stared at the 160-year-old drawing. The man in the image wore cowboy boots and a hat with a silver band. The woman had long black hair and stood with the same confident posture he saw in Elena every day. It was impossible, but undeniable. There's something else, Ayanna said, her voice heavy with emotion. Something we have been waiting to share until the time was right. She led them out of the museum to an area behind the building where several young Apache men were working on construction. Jake had assumed they were building another storage facility, but, as they approached, he realized it was something much more significant. The structure was circular, built from local stone using ancient techniques. It looked like a traditional council lodge, but larger and more elaborate than any Jake had seen. This is a ceremonial center, Ayanna explained. The first to be built in this region in over 150 years. When it's completed next month, We'll be holding the first traditional Apache wedding ceremony in this valley since before the cavalry wars.
Elena gasped.
Whose wedding? Ayana's smile was radiant. Yours and Jake's, of course. According to Apache tradition, according to the vision prophecies, according to the sacred obligations that bind your families together. Jake felt tears sting his eyes.
You want to give us an Apache wedding ceremony?
We want to complete the circle that began 160 years ago when your ancestors first joined their destinies, Genoa said.
We want to formally recognize what the spirits have already blessed.
As Jake looked around at the bustling Heritage Center, at the young Apache people learning their traditional culture, at the scholars documenting their history, at his wife whose heritage had just been revealed to span two worlds, he understood that he had never really bought a ranch for $50.
He had inherited a destiny.
The sound that had seemed like thunder 6 months ago was clearer now, the sound of drums calling the Apache people home to a land that had never forgotten them, preserved by love that had transcended centuries and survived every attempt to destroy it. As Elena took his hand and led him toward the ceremonial center where they would soon pledge their lives to each other in the ancient way, Jake Morrison realized that some stories don't end, they just find new chapters to begin. The desert wind carried the sound of singing across the valley, voices raised in Apache songs that had been silent for generations but would never be silent again. And, in that wind, Jake could swear he heard the whisper of an Apache medicine woman who had seen this moment in a vision 160 years ago, and had trusted that love would find a way to make it real. The $50 cowboy had come home to a heritage he'd never known was his, to a love that had been waiting for him across the centuries, to a land that had always known he was coming. And he was never going to leave again.